joining us for our Difficult Conversations About Race, our second series in our three-part series. Before we really get into the discussion today, I want to highlight a couple of housekeeping items. Participants, of course, you will notice that you are muted upon entry. You're not able to either chat verbally or turn on your cameras, but you are able to use the chat feature, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, to be able to enter questions, and one of our panelists will respond. We will assist with monitoring the chat so that you can get your questions answered. Again, good afternoon. My name is Shireen Cabrera Bentley. I am the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Behavioral Health at the Howard County Health Department. In collaboration with Empowerment Counseling, our local health improvement coalition, and various community partners who will serve as moderators for our monthly sessions, we are very excited to welcome you today to the second session of our three-part series on how to initiate difficult conversations about race with children. Talking about race, although hard or uncomfortable, is necessary. Acknowledging the history and current status of race relations in America is an opportunity for us to engage in thoughtful, respectful, and productive conversations. And we are here to provide those tools and guidance to help you as you walk along that journey. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to our moderator for this event. Her name is Audra Henning Nixon, MPH, Masters of Public Health. Audra attended Bennett College and Yale University for her master's in public health. Audra works at NIH, which is National Institutes of Health, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion program manager at the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. Audra volunteers within the Howard County community. She co-wrote 2 community-focused grants for the African American Community Roundtable. She is a member of Horizon Foundation's inaugural Equity Collaborative. She currently serves as a vice chair of the Board of Health for Howard County and is the chair for the Health Disparities Subcommittee. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Audra Nixon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am truly excited to be here today. We've had some really great conversations leading up to today's event. Dr. Evans brings to this event a wealth of information, a passion for youth, and our conversations have just been so supportive to both myself and our other committee members as we talk about how do we talk about difficult conversations with children. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Evans. I also want to share that before, when we were discussing children, one of the keynotes was exactly how do we talk about race with, let's just say, elementary children or middle school children or high school children. How do we kind of traverse all those age groups? I was inspired by Dr. Evans' comment to us, which was, it really is a conversation at the table, and all of my children are at the table. And we have 6 children, a blended family, and they go from elementary school to college. That was impactful, and I knew that today would be really exciting to give you the tools to talk to your children from a practitioner who is walking the walk, but also has a passion for children. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Evans. Dr. Robert L. Evans III is a culturally competent psychologist, licensed clinical professional counselor, and master addictions counselor with more than 2 decades of experience and passion for helping individuals and families, recognizing thoughts and behaviors that hinder progress. His career has been dedicated to enlightening people with the keys to overcoming trauma, which are to forgive oneself and or to forgive others. Dr. Evans is the CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services, LLC, a private practice and consulting company dedicated to empowering internal gifts, connecting thoughts with behaviors, developing character, and elevating mindset. So I want to welcome you today. We are here to have a community conversation, to provide guidance and offer structure around conversations addressing the current civil unrest across the world as a result of racial injustice, and continue the discussion of cultural competency. We are joined today by Dr. Evans to share his perspective and expertise on cultural competence and how to have difficult conversations with children. Welcome, Dr. Evans.
Oh man, that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm just excited to be here. Hopefully we can really keep the energy going. I think you said everything that I would say if I was introducing myself. I'm excited to be someone who not only has experience in the field with direct service, just over time in multiple different arenas, from psych hospitals to group homes, and even teaching special ed for some time and working in community corrections and residential programs, and now having my private practice. I also have a wealth of experience in real life. Having 6 kids, beautiful kids who I have the honor to lead the way with my wife, and we're studying them and learning them along the way, and every one of them requires their own special access code, right? So they have their own combination lock, and we get to figure out what that is. And so we want to really dispel myths that many parents come with. It's like, let me just use this same approach across the board for all my kids. Or kids are not ready to hear this. And we're going to get into why they're probably more ready to hear things than even we are, right? So, without further ado, I'm just excited to get this party started, and let's get into the information. Hopefully people have the courage to just say, hey, I have a question, and let's get the conversation going.
Very good. The video that's getting started right now.
Hello, I'm Dr. Robert Evans III, and I'm founder and CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services. I'm here with the second part of a 3-part series on New Normal Discussions. Today we're going to be talking about difficult conversations with our children about race. We're going to get into some steps, into some rules of engagement. Step number 1, understand your stance. What we're referring to when I say understand your stance is you really have to be comfortable with your position when it comes to race relations. How do you feel about where you stand? Where are you when it comes to whites and blacks and Native Americans and Asians and Jewish people and all races being in one country together and fighting for the same cause? Where do you stand with that? Be comfortable with that and understand it, because you're going to be tested when it comes to having conversations with your children. They're going to ask you questions, and you're going to have to be able to respond. Understand your stance. Step number 2, be prepared for anything. When it comes to having difficult conversations with our children, especially conversations about race, we want to be prepared for anything that we may hear from them. Our children are very sharp, and oftentimes we underestimate them. They're very intuitive and they pay attention. They're also able to read our emotions and take our temperature, even when we don't know we're being read. So we need to be in control of our emotions throughout the conversation and remain calm. So being prepared means that if you need to meditate prior to the conversation, if you need to drink some tea, then that may do the trick. Whatever you need to do so that you can remain calm throughout the conversation, do it, because you need to be prepared. Step number 3, be 100% honest and transparent when it comes to having these conversations. What do I mean by honesty and transparency? If your children ask you a question about how you feel about race relations in America, you need to be honest. They are going to be able to read when you're not telling the truth anyway, and they're going to be able to see if your actions don't add up to your words. But also transparency, that's very important. Be open and transparent about your struggles with race relations, what you've gone through. If you've made some decisions in the past that were not friendly or kind, and you've changed your mind and you've been able to overcome those things, you want to be completely transparent about that, because you never know what your children are struggling through, and that may help them. So you want to be 100% honest and 100% transparent. Step number 4, identify right and wrong. This one may be a tough one for some of us because, we're not perfect individuals by far. We make mistakes. And oftentimes, especially when we were young, we may have done the wrong thing. And when we're having these kind of conversations with our children, it's important to be able to identify the right and the wrong. Be able to identify the things that you did wrong with your children. Teach them how you were able to overcome those things and what you learned from those things, because it may help them. Also, be able to identify the right and the wrong that's done by other people. One of the latest atrocities that we've seen, the shooting of Jacob Blake, the guy who was just walking to his car and he shot 7 times in the back, was absolutely wrong. And we need to be able to identify that when we're having these kind of conversations with our kids, because the child is going to ask, why did that man get shot in his back 7 times? What was the purpose for that? What are you going to say? Be able to identify the right and the wrong. So let's recap. Step number 1, understand your stance. Step number 2, be prepared for anything. Step number 3, be 100% honest and transparent. And step number 4, identify the right and the wrong. Now we're going to get into some rules of engagement. Rule number 1, ensure that you provide a safe space. You want to make sure that your children are completely comfortable with having this conversation. Oftentimes, children are not comfortable having sensitive conversations with their parents. So you want to ensure that you're in control of your posture, in control of your nonverbal, your facial expressions, in control of your emotions and your composure. But also you want to make sure that the environment is comfortable. If you need to take them to a park or someplace where they're going to enjoy having a conversation, do that. But you want to make sure that they feel safe in having this conversation. Rule number 2, don't interrupt. And I had to say it that way because some of you parents, this may be tough, because you love just interrupting your children when they're in the middle of their speech or when they're giving their opinion. But after you've done all that work of providing this safe space for them, you're going to have to listen to everything that they have to say. Really make sure that they're getting out their point of view. Don't interrupt. Rule number 3, use ORs. Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. This is a great strategy pulled from motivational interviewing, which is good for pulling information from difficult people, especially from children who are really just uncomfortable with talking. Or maybe they don't know how to articulate what they want to say. You want to be able to get them to open up and get as much information from them as possible. Use ORs. Open-ended questions. Basically, we don't want to ask yes or no questions because that's all you're going to get is a yes or a no. Do you have any thoughts or anything that you've been thinking about as far as what's been going on lately in the news?
No, I don't have any thoughts on anything right now.
Okay. You want to ask questions that are going to get your children to think and really get to the bottom of what they're feeling. So instead of saying, did you like what you saw on TV? You want to say, how did that make you feel? Questions like that will get them to really explain how they feel about a situation. Open-ended questions. And I will switch up the question to tell me, what have you heard about what's been going on lately?
I've heard Trump being impeached and about people breaking into the Capitol. I've heard about other things that have been happening with coronavirus.
Oh yeah, there's a lot lot going on with coronavirus. Affirmations. Now, this is important because this is where you're going to make a connection with your children. You want to make sure you're doing it through your nonverbals, your eye contact, your facial expressions. It's really an acknowledgement of where they're coming from. Remember, this strategy is going to make sure that your children are opening up. So you want to make them feel comfortable. And so you want to make sure you affirm.
What I want to say is a part of being Black, but also it's also about other people who are different, like aren't the same color or have disabilities and stuff, is that I think that if you're different, that means you're unique. So if you're different than others, and that's a good thing because you shouldn't be the same. That just doesn't bring out anything in you.
Oh, wow, man, that is profound. Reflections. Now, here's where your children are going to know that you've been listening because you're going to be able to reflect back to them what you've heard. Not only that, you're going to be able to reflect what you think they feel because you've been listening beyond the words for their feelings. For example, if they say, you know what, I didn't like when such and such happened, you're going to say, oh, so you feel frustrated. And they say, oh, wow. Not only that, they're going to keep talking because once they hear that acknowledgement, it's going to trigger something for them that's just going to keep them talking. And that's a reflection. So what I heard you say is that when it comes to people being a different color or having different challenges that they may face, I think you said disability, that just makes them unique. So it's not necessarily viewed as a disability sometimes just because someone is different. It just makes them unique and it makes them stand out because we shouldn't all try to be the same. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Awesome. Summary. Now here's how you close out your oars. You want to make sure that you're able to recap everything that you've heard. You've already given affirmations and reflections, and your child knows that you've been listening, but now you want to be able to make sure that you're 100% on the same page with a complete summary of what they've said. That's your summary.
I just think encouragement. Encouragement is a really big part within the growth of, younger people, especially if they're your kids, they look up to the older adults within the household. So I just think encouragement is a bigger part in, a child's growth.
Yeah, so encouragement. Okay. Well, just to recap, I think this was a good discussion. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about inequality in America?
No.
No?
That's
But you covered a lot. You talked about the history of America and where we came from and where we are and how, inequality is a big piece of the American puzzle, which I thought was a really, really great analogy, by the way. And you said that piece of the puzzle is something that just needs to be fixed. You know how you try to fit a puzzle piece in and it won't quite fit in good, you try to force it? Kind of reminds me of that. So we need to do some things to make sure that puzzle piece is fixed. You talked about responsibility of us all to educate ourselves on our history. I think that's really, really important. And those people who are in denial of the history need to get some courage, because basically it's fear that's holding them back, and they need to get some courage, get up on their history so that they can say, okay, you know what, let's not have history repeat itself. Let's do something different. As far as families go, and the responsibility that we have a responsibility to communicate with each other, encourage each other, and make sure that we expose each other and make sure that we expose you guys to other cultures and other races so that you can learn more history and we can all get to know each other and become a unified country. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
So to recap rules of engagement, ensure that you're providing a safe space for your children to speak, don't interrupt, and use oars. In closing, hopefully this video has provided some insight and some guidance as to how to have difficult conversations with your children about race or any other difficult conversations for that matter. Our children are precious gifts to us, and we want to make sure that we're able to take care of them and we're able to provide a safe environment for them to open up. Stay tuned for part 3 of this discussion, where I will be giving practical tips on how to manage implicit bias. I'm Dr. Robert Evans III, founder and CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services. For more information on our training services, please visit us at empowertoday.net.
Dr. Evans, we have gotten some questions in the chat that folks want to make sure that they have access to this really great training. And we just want to clarify for our viewers that this video will be uploaded and information will be in the link for LHIC and also for the health department. I wanted to start and pose a question to you while information is being given that we are asking for questions in the chat that we will try to answer during this session. So Dr. Evans, our children, by the way, were those your children in the video?
Yes, they were. Yes, and there was no practicing. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna record you," and that was just it. So those were their raw answers, and of course we had to condense a lot, but they were giving some great information, great responses. So that was them.
Very good. We know that our children are not just spectators in things that they've seen on TV, the racial trauma, the issues with policing. And so they're not bystanders, they're actually really feeling this trauma. And so one of the questions was, what exactly, how is this showing up in your practice? With COVID-19, we know that there's just more watching of TV and absorbing all the social media outlets. And so our children are feeling this, are experiencing this just as we are. And one of the questions was, how is this showing up in your practice?
I would say this particular, when we're talking about is just observing the different atrocities, racial injustice, and all those things that's been happening during the pandemic. I would say just to tease that out would be challenging because it really is a compounding issue that's happening, and it's widespread. It's not just the babies, it's not just the children, it's the adults, it's all of us, and it's across the world. So, children being isolated and being away from that social contact that they thrive on and that they need has been majorly impactful. So, what I have seen is increased fear across the board. So the fear has been increased by parents, witnessing certain things and wanting to keep their children safe. So they're wanting to protect their kids, so they're not letting them out. So it's, for young Black kids, it's not just, I'm afraid of coronavirus, but I'm afraid if I let you out, you may have some contact with the police. So let me not let you just go out. This is a great opportunity for me to keep you isolated. So I have seen children who have been very angry and upset because they just can't get out, and they've been really feeling stifled, and depression has set in as a result. Spike in depression and depressive symptoms as a result of just not being able to plug in with their usual networks. And it's opening up now. So it's shifting a little bit now. Schools are opening back up, activities are opening back up, but there has been a compounding effect of what has been going on overall. And when I talk to my clients, the young clients I have, about some of the things that they've seen in the news and in the media, those things weren't as significant as just not being able to go outside. So, while they were impacted by it, I think, it's really the parents who are impacted more than the children. And really, we as parents will have a tendency to impose our fear on our kids. And it's a misperception that we feel like our kids are not going to be able to handle it. And that's because we can't. So because we can't handle it, we assume our children won't be able to. And so they're not ready.
Mhm.
when it's really not fair to state that, because they're going to be able to adjust a lot quicker than we are, you know, with their brains not being fully developed and them being so plastic at the time before 25. They're able to adjust. They're very malleable, and
Mhm.
so they'll adjust much quicker than we will.
Mhm.
So we have to be careful to not impose our own fear, our own insecurities, and on our children. So, you know, in practice, you know, just overall, I've seen an increase in depressive symptoms just as a result of everything that's going on. I think I have seen in the community, I've seen a spike. I believe it's a spike in fear of young males. I've seen a couple of situations where young males were interacting with the police, and it was, in my opinion, it was fear is what was driving their responses, you know, because it's
Mhm.
like, I don't know what I may get. So, you know, that's what I'm experiencing.
Very good. We had a question that says, what do you do when your older children's opinion is vastly from yours and you feel it may get them in trouble?
Yeah. And that's what we anybody who's a parent and they have kids who once they reach 18, once they get to that point, they really want to pull away. They want, especially the young males, they want to be independent. They want to be on their own. They don't want you to tell them what to do. They want to find their own way. And so we just have to be consistent. You know, I face that with the oldest children, just wanting to find their way. I had my son say, "I just want to do it my way. I know you have it your way, but I just want to do it my way." And so at best, what we do is just give them the information that we have. As parents, we want our kids to do exactly what we say, but the reality is they're going to do what they want to do. Our job is to give them the tools and the information so that they can have an option. Okay, you know what? I have an option of a hammer or a chainsaw. My dad said use the hammer. Let me try the chainsaw. So what I tell my kids is, and we walk through the consequences. We walk through all the steps of problem solving, right? You know, and that's what I would definitely suggest is really learn the steps of problem solving, help them to keep their eye on what their overall goal is, and
Mhm.
to pay attention to the various consequences of the decisions that they may make, so that they can see, okay, if I choose this decision, here's the possible consequences. So once I give you that, I tell my kids I'm gonna sleep very well, because I told you, if you take that road, you may fall into a pit. If you chose to fall in the pit, then you're going to have to climb your way out of that.
Mhm.
And I'm going to sleep it real good like a baby while you do it, because I need you to experience that so that you can know next time, okay, maybe I'll pay closer attention to what was told to me. So, you know, I think one of the things we need to avoid in those moments is getting angry, getting frustrated, because that's something that I remember my son was 18. It was anger was set in because you really want your child to get it, and you can't force them to get it. Life is going to teach them, and in fact, they're more attached to what their peers and what's in the
Mhm.
community and all of that. That's going to be more influential than you are at the moment, until they experience certain things. So avoid anger, but keep your eye on, okay, here is what I need this child to get from what I want them to, what this is what I want them to hear, this is what I want them to get. And after that, you got to be able to let go, because at that point it's up to them to make the decision.
Very good. I do have a follow-on question to that, but I want to get another question in the chat. And that is how to discuss race with children from different racial backgrounds, for instance, immigrant children.
Okay, and so I'm assuming maybe this is someone who's in practice, or someone who is some type of working in the social field, interacting with children of a different race, and
Or, I mean, I could see that possibly it's parents whose children are dealing with their own challenges as it relates to being from another ethnicity, other than the dominant, or, and so at the end of the day, they're just moving along in life. For instance, a friend of mine is from Nigeria. She said in Nigeria, everyone's Black or African. And at the end of the day, the police are Black and everyone's Black. And when you come to the United States, you get a very stark understanding of the difference of races, right? And that there's a discussion, there's a transition to explain race and race competency, sometimes with immigrants that come to the United States because they're not familiar with it. That's just my experience.
I believe that is it's going to require some patience in those discussions, because if you're talking to someone who is experiencing, they're going through their own experience in interfacing with America. They're coming into something new, a new environment that we've been in and we've adjusted to, that we've been getting to know for quite some time, and it's new to them. It's a fresh environment. They're going to possibly experience some things that are just like a culture shock. And so we want to be extremely patient with walking people through experience. And I think what we would need to be careful also with is careful information sharing, right? Because we can share information based on our personal experience that could form biases, that could be unfair, that could be just based on our own personal. We want to encourage people to learn as much information as possible and be exposed to as many people as possible, but also be able to give them the reality, the layout of the land, and this is what you're going to experience here, so we have to be honest. We have to be careful of our own biases. We have to be careful not to implant fear on someone based on our own fear, but to give them information. So here's information for you to have, not to sway you, but this is information for you to continue to do your own further research. So when it comes to children in that situation, I can see that being extremely challenging, depending on what direction the conversation is going.
Sure.
But what I would say is children are extremely insightful, so it should be a conversation where it's a back and forth and we're getting just as much information from them as we're giving. So the more you can make the environment safe and comfortable for them to share, the more that you'll get information from them. So, I really, what I find is that when conversations become difficult between adults and children, the adult will shut the conversation off. The adult will say, you know what, that's enough. Because they just don't know how to continue the discussion because it's difficult for them. And so if you can, as much as you can, not cut off conversations because it's difficult for you, and just continue to allow a safe space for your children to express themselves.
Bidirectional is what I noticed in your videos. There was definitely a conversation and then also a mirroring back of what they said. Very helpful.
Absolutely.
So there was another question of how can one become culturally competent?
Well, is that the end of the question?
That's the end of the question.
Oh,
Cultural competency in our description of today's session, and they want to know, how can you become culturally competent?
exposure. It's going to be exposure. In order to become culturally competent, you're going to have to expose yourself as much as you can to different cultures. So you have to do some reading. You're going to have to do some talking to people. And what people typically do is they gravitate to where they're most comfortable. They gravitate to people that look familiar, or groups that seem comfortable and familiar. And sometimes you have to go to groups that seem uncomfortable or different. And you would have to be intentional. If you want to become culturally competent, you have to be intentional about learning other cultures. So that's exposing yourself to different music, different genre of theater. My youngest children are in a Spanish immersion programs for school, so they're immersed in 100% Spanish for education. So it's extremely beneficial for them. But as we become adults, we have to say, you know what, I want to get outside of my comfort zone. Maybe let me, instead of just going to my usual vacation place, go someplace different. Go someplace where there's a language that you don't know. My wife and I went to Europe. We went to Turkey. And it was a very interesting experience, but we were able to be exposed to so much, and you learn so much. And what it would do is dispel a lot of myths that you may see. We were exposed to many people who were of the Muslim faith, and it was really, really rich experience, very, very culturally rich. And it was great because it will remove certain biases that you may have developed and you don't even realize. And we'll get into that in the third video.
Very good. We have a question. What are some example scenarios when a solution-based conversation may be necessary versus an opinion-based conversation?
Okay. Great question. I think that may be a spinoff from the last discussion. We were talking about solution-based versus opinion-based conversations. And it could be the same way with your children. If you are discussing something where there needs no real resolution, we're just talking about the difference between maybe the Lakers basketball team and the Wizards basketball team. Who's your favorite player? We can go back and forth about who you think the best basketball player is, right? But we don't have to solve a problem with that. However, if you're getting in trouble, and let's go into our children, if I have to keep repeating myself to you because you are repeating the same behavior, we need to now have a solution. So this is no longer an opinion. This is, if you want something different from having your phone taken away or not being grounded or not being able, well, a behavior is going to have to change, and we now need to come up with a solution. So for example, I'll give you an example. My 10-year-old, we have a pantry that has snacks and things of that nature in there. She knows she can't have food up in her room. So cleaning her bed, and we find like some candy wrappers under the pillow, right? Typical kid stuff, but I'm having a conversation. I'm wondering, why do you feel like you're not comfortable enough to just come ask for it? And probably because, if it's in the middle of the day or breakfast time, you can't have candy, right? But we need a solution, because we can't have you going in the pantry when you feel like it. We can't have you getting in trouble and having your phone taken away. So now, how can I help you change this behavior? What do I need to do to help this? And so she gave me, well, you can do this. She gave me the consequences, right? So, when it comes to adults or children, sometimes if it's an adult conversation, we can be going back and forth about politics all day. But for me, I like solutions. So, I want to know, what are we going to do now? So if you're in the middle of a conversation and you need to get to what happens next, then that's a solution-based conversation, because you need to come out of that with, what are we going to do now as a result of this conversation? If we don't have to go away from this conversation and do anything, it's an opinion-based conversation, right? You like what you like, I like what I like. Okay. But if it's a conversation that we're going to have to revisit again, and we're going to be upset the next time we revisit it, then we need a solution.
Very good. So I have a quick question. And this is referring to African-American children. The African-American Community Roundtable was looking at the suspension rates of African-American children in Howard County, and also the academic gap, for instance. This is something that they had an interest in, and they're looking for solutions. In our reading and research with regard to this topic, there was a very interesting discussion about the particular trauma of Black children. And so in your practice, do you have any thoughts about, honestly, we know as an African-American community what that's about, but translating that in a large sense so that there's an understanding and an empathy as it relates to what a Black child goes through versus other children. Could you give us your thoughts on when, for instance, if it's a teacher trying to understand an experience and support a community of people. For instance, now it's Asia Pacific. But when you're trying to communicate with someone like a teacher or a counselor or even a parent, what are the words or what is the method by which to gain empathy for that child's experience? And so it's not just looked at a child thing, but there is actual trauma based upon their race.
That's a multi-layered question.
Okay.
I'm gonna tackle. Don't worry. I'm gonna see if I can tackle that one. But I love it. It's an outstanding question, and it really reminds me of. I was listening to a podcast, outstanding podcast. Huberman Lab. It's a neurobehavioralist specialist out of Stanford. He talks about how we can adjust our brain, and he really talks a lot about neuroplasticity in the process of if we want to adjust something about ourselves, how to do it. And so, it reminds me of your question because it really boils down to the desire of the teacher or the counselor. What do they want? Do they want to be more impactful and helpful with their kids of different races? And in order for them to improve their approach as a clinician or a teacher or a counselor, they first have to be aware and recognize that there could potentially be a problem or there could potentially be something that I need to take a look at. There needs to be a level of self-awareness to say, maybe I should take a look at my approach to see if there's anything that I can do better, or how can I be most impactful with my kids? If there's no desire there, they may not even be able to hear the information that's being shared with them because they won't be able to connect. Because there's a ton of research around the impact of implicit bias on multiple professions, but especially teachers, and how teachers approach with children and being extremely, how they respond to certain behaviors and things of that nature, and quickly to suspend or quickly expel, and all of those things, which just suggest that it's clear that there can be some implicit bias in that profession. Well, if you're talking to a teacher who's unaware of that and not interested in making any improvement in their approach, they're not going to hear anything you have to say. So it starts with their awareness and their desire. So I would start there. Now if we're talking to a group of teachers who are saying, I want to know, I want to know how I can be the best teacher possible. I want to be able to impact all kids. Then great, we can start with that group because that's the group I want to focus on, right? And it would be about being intentional about learning what is the actual facts of the matter. Actual facts of the matter is that you could be experiencing some implicit bias that you don't know about. So what is that, and what do I do about that? We have to be intentional about learning what are the ways that I could be looking at people that's unfair. So what I would suggest to people who really want to do better is learn as much information about the cultures that they're going to be interacting with as possible, right? Learning as much information and history about that culture that you can, so that you can begin to dispel any previous notions that may have developed in your mind. For example, when I was working in community corrections, worked in community corrections for 14 years, and I sat next to Black parole officers, white parole officers, everybody. I overheard a Caucasian parole officer talking to a Black client. I never used the word offender or criminal or anything like that, right? I always said client. This is someone who's wanting to find a job. So he wanted to work in politics. She told him, you will never be a politician. You will never be able to work in politics. You cannot do that. You have to do something else. This was her opinion. Now, I'm sure she didn't feel I'm being racist or I'm being biased or I'm being unfair. She was speaking from her perspective of what she thought was right, but it was completely skewed. I had the same client before her, and I let him go all over the world doing what it is that she was telling him he couldn't do. And when he told her, my last parole officer let me do it, She said he was crazy. He shouldn't have done that.
Got it.
So, you know, it's I don't think it was on her part intentional. She had no awareness of what she was doing.
Sure.
Sometimes people are just oblivious, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, it starts with awareness, intention, and a desire. And if we have all of those things, you really have to educate yourself on the people that you're working with so that you can say, okay, you know what, these people are just as capable as anybody else.
Mhm.
Let me
I'm-
remove the judgment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm going to flip the question a little bit. And someone asked, how can you instill in someone a desire to learn about other people? And so you talked about the ideal group is those who are interested.
Right.
But say you're in a school system and your desire is to make change, and invariably you have those who aren't interested. Do you have any advice of how to instill interest or support those to broaden their perspective, to want to learn a little bit more and have a little bit more empathy for other races or children of other races?
You know, that is a question that is extremely important. It is a great question, and I have to be careful with my own and biases on that one, right? So I have to expose myself on this one because from experience, I've done tons and tons of training and have trained the whole agency on commu um, on communication strategies, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral intervention, and the agency would train all these people, and some people will go do what they need to do, and some people absolutely will not. And instead of holding those people accountable, they wanted to throw more training.
Mm-hmm.
And my advice was no more training, apply accountability.
Very good.
So, you know, to answer that question, I believe anybody's capable of change.
Mm-hmm.
But to force somebody to want to change, I'm not ready to expend that kind of energy. But what we can do is make it very uncomfortable for people to make them feel like, well, maybe I do need to change. And that's by spending the attention, place your attention with the people who are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a group of teachers and you have some teachers who want it and some teachers who don't, when you are uplifting those teachers who are doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're holding those teachers who are not doing it accountable, it's going to push them in a direction.
Mm-hmm.
But to really instill a desire in them is extremely challenging.
Agreed. There was a discussion at NIH about women in science, and one of the nuggets that came from it is one is allyship, so women looking for either men or women in meetings that are allies of theirs to understand, to support their ideas. But that's one of the challenges with children, is that they oftentimes cannot advocate for them. And so the idea that we're looking at accountability inside of school systems, as well as teachers and administration and school boards, I think is the answer. So
Yes.
very good. So previously, Dr. Evans, there was a follow-on question when you were talking about your older children and how you are coaching them and giving them, kind of laying out all the options and an ultimate end of what you believe could occur if they took this route, and what could occur if they take the next route, and then you sleep comfortably. And I love that as a mother of 20-year-olds. But someone said, could you help them with a really, what is challenging for them is when they believe they are making choices that could lead into death. Maybe it's speeding, maybe it's drugs, whatever it is. Could you give us your insight? And we have 10 minutes left to the end. This has been awesome in that is a real challenge, and they're asking a real question. How do you navigate a conversation when you can't, I mean, essentially taking your hands off because it's their choice, they're adults. But how do you navigate a conversation if the ultimate end of that choice could be death?
So I think that's an outstanding question because, you know, in that is really the definition of a solution-based discussion versus an opinion-based, right? We absolutely need a solution on this one. I think for me, I remember when I absolutely took my power back because I was giving it away. As parents, we give away our power when we raise our voice, when we get angry with our children. That's giving away your power. You have the authority. You have the say so. So once I realized it, because I said, "Am I yelling? He's got me. This is the only person on earth that could get me to yell. Wow." So I'm not yelling at you no more. Because when it comes down to it, and I told him this, I said, my oldest, my 21-year-old said, this was when he was, I think he was 18. I said, there's some things right now you may not understand. And so I'm doing my best to get you to understand, but if you don't understand, it doesn't matter because it's still going to happen like this.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes down to something that is that detrimental, you just exercise your authority. So if it's you can't drive the car, if there needs to be a curfew, or then you can't go to this location, you have to establish the boundaries that you're going to hold very firm, and you have to be consistent with holding that firm boundary, period, as a parent. And so first I would say lead by example, because your kids, it's going to be hard for them to get on board with what you have to say if you're telling them to do something that you're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
First, lead by example. Secondly, if you have a firm boundary, you have to stand on that boundary, no questions asked, no days off, consistent, regardless of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just it, and
Got it.
that's the challenge. Is sometimes parents feel guilty or feel like bad guys, like, man, I'm a bad guy. No, you're not. You're a parent. You're doing the best for your kid. Hold the boundary.
Dr. Evans, our parents did not feel guilty, did they?
Oh no. We feel guilty now.
Oh, so as we come up against our last 7 minutes, I was inspired during the last session where when you talked about the uncomfortable feelings that are occurring in race relations, you said to feel the discomfort, kind of sit in the discomfort, but at the same time have a vision of where you want to go, what you want this relationship to be like, what you want your world to be like, what you want your school to be like, or your experience to be. And so can you apply that as it relates to our discussions with our children?
Absolutely. I believe that that's actually my definition of motivation. In my book, Run to the Pain, I talk about that. I talk about the definition of motivation, because one of the things that I help people with every day is motivation and how to get unstuck, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. When it comes to parenting, it's the same way. How do I get my kid to move?
Mm-hmm.
And you first have to be okay with recognizing the discomfort. So it's discomfort plus vision. You got to be uncomfortable. So if you see something that's uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable situation with your children. It's an uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to see how the decisions that they're making, how you guys are relating to each other. The next thing is, once you realize, okay, this isn't good, you have to be able to see the alternative. You have to be able to see what it is that you want for you and your kids, so that you can go after it. Sometimes it's hard for people to visualize anything other than their current experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that can be a challenge because, we have generational curses or generational trauma that's passed down because people just don't see themselves above or beyond what what their parents set before them.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people where they hit a ceiling, and the ceiling is wherever their parents landed.
Mm.
And so, we have to be able to establish a vision for our family, for
Mm-hmm.
our relationship with our kids. And then we have to go after that vision
Mm-hmm.
and
Very
be
good.
okay with the discomfort.
Very good. So we have 4 minutes until we end. I know that we have felt really strongly about the excitement about your workbook, but we haven't mentioned it. Would you mind mentioning it at our close? Because it's a tool that I think there are those who are very interested in it.
Absolutely. Man, I wish I could grab a copy of it. It's called intentionality. It's something that I developed through my work with working with individuals and families every day, and recognizing the things that keep people. My lovely assistant. It's called intentionality, right? So the workbook really does have many things that help you to become self-aware,
Mhm.
and then there's a section on self-correction.
Mhm.
So it's not enough to be aware of the things that we have to work on for ourselves. We gotta have a plan to correct it.
Mhm.
So within the book is going to give you opportunity to list out your priorities. That's one of the first things that people, when they come to me, they're so overwhelmed,
Mhm.
but partly because they just haven't identified appropriate priorities, right? So they have all of these things that they want to do. They don't write it down. They're just making it happen. So they're overwhelmed. So we got to list out the priorities, and then we have to put the priorities in the appropriate order, because sometimes we can get things off of our plate. But there's so much power in putting things down on paper.
Mhm.
It's sort of like with everyone nowadays has a smartphone. Sooner or later, your phone starts to glitch, and you're like, why is it moving so slow? But as soon as you move everything to the cloud, everything frees up. And it's the same way for us as humans. We got to download some information off our brain. So this gives you that opportunity to do so. It's talking about ways that identify the things that you feel like you need to correct within you, the things you need to
Mhm.
correct around you.
Mhm.
It's going to get into triggers and the things that you allow, the buttons you allow people to push. And it's going to give you ways to correct that so that you can remove those buttons and stop allowing people to trigger you.
Dr. Gibb,
So,
may I interrupt?
yes.
I really want those who may have just for the first time met you and have heard this conversation. Would you share with them um, now what the next session, that next video, because I think that we want them to come back and get more of your training as it relates to racial relations and difficult conversations.
Yes, yes, yes. So, if you want more information on intentionality, just go to my website, hit the store, all the books are there. As far as the next session, we're going to be talking about implicit bias, and that's really where we get to some really good discussion on how do we deal with what's going on internally? How do we deal with what's going on subconsciously and what we're maybe not even aware of, you know? And so strategies on that, and some people don't even realize it exists. You know, when we talk about how police officers are engaging with certain people versus other people, and it's like, well, that can't be this or that can't be that. Well, there's a ton of research that says that physicians will interact with black women or black people differently from they interact with other people.
Sure.
It's research around it. It's research around how teachers would do the same thing. Research around how therapists would do the same thing. Well, why wouldn't police officers be in the same bag? We're all people. So we're going to talk about how we all can fall victim to implicit bias. We all can fall victim to it. It's just being aware, and then it's saying, okay, now do I have a desire to do something about it?
Very
And if
good.
you do, then what do you do next?
Very good. Perfect. Thank you. So
Definitely.
it's now at the top of the hour. I hope that you learned something. We have a survey. We'd love to get your feedback on today's session, and we look forward to sharing more information with you in June. Look on the website that where you registered for this session, and join us next month. Thank you.
Excellent.